Margins, with Siobhan Henry, pushing boundaries of social exclusion.
Hello and welcome to the Margins podcast, where we push the boundaries of social exclusion through dialogue. My name is Siobhan Henry, and we are joined behind the scenes by MZ Kaka, who heads up Margins' public education campaign, and his talented production team at the Academy of Sound Engineering, Kabelo Mokoena and Michael Johnson. Today we will be exploring socially just learning and the role it can play in creating a more inclusive society. And I have the great pleasure of introducing our guest, Dr. Warren Leichtle-Chalken, who's joining us from Dallas in the United States. Warren advances cultural competency, diversity, equity, and inclusion outcomes at Christus Health. He heads system-wide diversity and inclusion, educational and operational strategies, and serves as an instructor, resource, and subject matter expert to ministries throughout the system. Warren designs high-quality, cost-effective learning solutions. He has a PhD in curriculum and instruction and a master's degree in public administration from Texas A&M University, as well as a certificate in advancing racial equity in the workplace from Harvard University. Welcome, Warren. What a fantastic bio. It's great to have you with us.
Well, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
So to start, Warren, could you tell us a little bit more about the work that you do?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And Sanbonani, Asalemu Alaikum, Dumalang, Molweni. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm in Texas, so we would say howdy to everybody. Yeah, so I would say my work is through four lenses: the internal, the interpersonal, the institutional, and the structural. And what I mean by that is the way we think, our internal wiring, shapes our interactions, our interpersonal interactions with one another, in other words, our behaviors. And those internal and interpersonal interactions occur within institutions, so organizations, various places, right? Wherever we are in an institution, a family, a church, a place of worship, etc. And those institutions have policies and practices, formal and informal. And when those formal and informal policies and practices overlap, we have something called a structure, or some people will call it systemic, something systemic. So the work that I do is humanization and joining in the process with people around the world to rehumanize the world through those four lenses, in the way that we think about ourselves, in the way we think about others, in the way we interact with people, in the way we institutionalize our policies, our informal policies, and ultimately challenge structures that harm and dehumanize and impede on other people's dignity.
Well, that's quite a lot to unpack, Warren. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of humanization as it relates to oppressive structures, and how that relates to, your personal efforts in the space of socially just learning and teaching?
Yes. I would say I'm a storyteller, so I have to begin from the perspective of story. And one of the pieces that I'm thinking about as it relates to this question, the first part about it is the idea of rehumanization. And this is not my idea. We can look at the work of Ntabiseng Motseme, the incredible scholar from the University of Johannesburg, who writes about humanization. And one of the things he talks about is, who are we separate from the systems, and then who are we in relation to the systems, and how does our humanity expand or contract as it relates to those. So I'd love to share a story. I live in a mixed race family, so I grew up in the late 80s, and before the quote unquote fall of apartheid, or as I would like to say, democratic South Africa. My family adopted my sister, who's a black woman, before it was legal in South Africa. And so here I am with my white siblings and my black sibling, and that experience really culminated, I think, in 2001, where we were evicted from our house due to financial situation. And I was 13 at the time. And the question was, okay, so we're homeless, so where do we go? And my white family members stepped in and said, well, we'll only take in the white children. We won't take in your sister. Your sister has to go to the street. And it was in that moment that the facade that I grew up with around not seeing color, and that's what we always said, well, we don't see color, we're all one family, right? What I began to see was, for the first time, there was a crack in my reality in terms of, the fact that we actually do see color. And color is being used to dehumanize my sister and humanize us. In other words, we were worthy to sleep in their house, and my sister was unworthy. And then the next question was, well, we want the boys, we don't want the girls. The boys can come and stay with me, the girls can't. And so there was these dividing lines that began to emerge in this very vulnerable moment. So through that, I'd want to just begin with this idea of humanization in the mind, right? Let's begin with the internal. Thinking about our thoughts in that moment. We're vulnerable. We are trying to find a place to live. We're on the street. The truck is literally packing our stuff away. They won't let us back into our house. And, this idea of superiority, false superiority is at play, which is informing people's behaviors. They're saying, well, I'll take this person, I'm going to take this one. And that already is a dehumanizing experience. To justify your humanity as siblings, my siblings came together and said, we're not going separate. You have to take us together. You cannot take us apart. And so there was a moment there where we had to face this reality. But the second piece, which I think is important, which now we go to the institutional piece, is the fact that we have a normalized society where institutions like banks and governments and people in power can use institutions to essentially make you homeless. And we see this in all places around. We see this all around the world, where people in power can decide that this land is important and people need to be moved off the land. And that's a form of violence. It's a form of dehumanization. Who gets to live in dignity in a shelter and who has to live on the street for whatever reasons. So that's where these structural pieces come together. So when we talk about dehumanization, we were dehumanized individually, as a small family, as a sibling group. But then when we start to branch it out into the South African context of land dispossession, when my ancestors came to the southern tip of Africa and go back to the process of land dispossession and the violence that is associated with that, it is a pattern of dehumanization. So now we need to talk about rehumanization, and that is the process of thinking back, behaving back, creating policies and practices back, and ultimately dismantling these structures that distribute power and resources that humanize some and dehumanize others. So I'll give a practical example of this. When we think about rehumanization, at our core, it's about asking the question of who is considered a human being. And that seems like a very simple question. And let me make it plain in the way that I understand it. You'll see commercials that say, Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, Ubuntu, we're all Ubuntu, Ubuntu, Ubuntu. We all live with Ubuntu, which on the surface, I am because you are, is at the core a very simple idea. And in many respects, people will say, well, we practice Ubuntu. But my question, and this is where rehumanization helps us think about this, is, well, what is the nature of those relationships? If I am because you are, what is the nature of that? And when we begin to go deeper, we start to see stratification. We start to see power operation. We start to see people with and people without. So how does someone who has the power to make other people homeless, how are they, I am who you are. How are they who I am when their decisions are putting us on the street? right? So it's not just about I am because you are. It's within a social context.
Yeah.
So rehumanization is about challenging that, going deeper, and demanding that if we're going to say I am because you are, we're actually going to ways in which we engage in the world. So I'll take that into teaching and learning. I think we'll have more time for that, but I think I just wanted to lay that foundation, Siobhan.
No, you've laid it very, very well, Warren, and I think you are very much a living, walking example of what diversity is. Warren, I just want to unpack some of the stuff that you've said. Now, your journey has taken a number of different paths, and I see, some themes emerging, which, I mean, it's a very compelling story, and I would like to reflect on that a little bit. So you had the personal experience of marginalization because of your socioeconomic circumstances, and being homeless is a trauma. I'm sure we can all appreciate that. But in the midst of all of that, you have given us some very tangible examples of the levels of marginalization in society. So in many of the lives of marginalized people who are listening to you today are so disempowered by the various experiences that they have of marginalization. And we've spoken about economic disadvantage, racial disadvantage. These things disempower us as marginalized people, and they hold us back from actually claiming our purpose and our place in society. So I want to ask you the question, what was it within you that allowed you to take all of your unique experiences of marginalization and transforming that to make a difference in the lives of so many other people?
Sure. What a beautiful question, Siobhan. And thank you for the honor of this question. I think my life is a love story to my sister, to my brother, and I give them love in accordance to what their needs are and who they are and how they live in the world. And so I think it's just as simple as that. It's just how can I love these siblings and these people who are so dear to me, and that's sort of always been a driving force. Before we shifted from the middle class to the working class, and even the underclass to some degree. Before that happened, there was a short period of time where my dad would treat us to Spur, and we would get out the car and we would run into Spur before my dad would get there. And one of the things that would happen is eventually my sister would say, when I go there, they don't seat us immediately, but when you go there, they seat us. When I go there, they tell us that the restaurant is full. And I would gaslight Melissa, I'd gaslight my sister, like, no way, that's not true. That's not true. So later in life, we would have a lot of fights about this. I don't see color. They don't see color. You're part of our family, whatever, all these kind of things. And as soon as you come in, the room changes, and you don't understand that. You don't understand that when you leave the room, family members treat me terribly. And, as I'm on this podcast with you, thinking about that deeper. But in a nutshell, it is a love story.
No, I mean, I think that's what you've just shared, Warren. I want to express our heartfelt gratitude. You have done us all a great service by sharing that experience. And I think the things that you've shared is shared by all of us South Africans. We started this podcast to interrogate the bare bones of the mindset of not just the marginalized, but those who also marginalize. And you've also highlighted that you've been in a bad socioeconomic situation, and that having a black sibling may have also placed you in a situation of marginalization. So there's all these intricacies of the experience of marginalization. So my question, Warren, is you touched a lot on your personal journey of self-awareness and the process of you becoming more aware of yourself allowed you to become your authentic self and also to embrace the authenticity in society, and that process allowed you to break down the barriers of marginalization. So my question to you is, what sort of guidance would you give to people who are struggling, both as marginalized people, but perhaps people who also marginalize others? How can we draw from your experience of self-awareness and authenticity in our personal lives as we seek to break down the barriers of marginalization?
Great, thank you for that question. I don't have the author of this statement. It's not my statement, so I want to make sure I don't take any credit for this. And I want to actually adapt it to this question. So the statement that that really resonated with me is that the line of justice in the world is within. And I want to reframe that to say that the line of Ubuntu, the I am because you are, which is a fundamental part of our humanity, is also within. The line of Ubuntu is within. And so to me, I think that as much as we do the work out there, which is important in those 4 quadrants, thinking, behaving, policy making, and structuring, at the heart of your question is actually the harder work in many respects is the work within. How can we confront that work, what that looks like for us? So where are some places that we can start? And I'll offer three spaces to reflect on. The first one is to treat all conflicts as clues. So when there are things that come up, what are those teaching us as symptoms? And how can we trace back to the roots of those things? So conflicts are clues. They tell us things if we have the curiosity to unpack them. Secondly, relationships, the quality of our lives exists in the quality, and by quality I mean the humanization, the humanized nature of our relationships. So the world that we want in our imagination, which is the third piece, which I'm going to get to in a moment, the world we want is not actually a destination. It's actually a world that we need to create now. We can live liberation. Liberation is not a destination, it's actually a practice. It is something that we are. It is not somewhere where we are going. It's something that we are. And so that intentional to each other. So the first one is the line of Ubuntu is within. The second one is the nature, the quality of our relationships, is the quality of our lives. And those relationships are important. The third one, which is to practice a radical imagination. One of the most profound, the world that we want must begin in our minds. It must begin in thinking. We are living in someone's imagination. So the question is, I encourage people to ask is, whose imagination are you living in right now? And how can we use our imagination? And there's a framework called Afro Rhythms from the Future, which talks about Afrofuturism. In other words, what would the world look like from our imagination? And when we start to do that imaginative work, it projects us into the future. The work of Octavia Butler, for example, it projects us into the future. We can imagine a world. So, for example, one of the things I imagine is a world in which we have a lens that you can see the humanity of someone rather than these identities, right? So in our imaginations, we can create those worlds. But what it also does is it helps us trace back to our ancestors and begin to heal those wounds. How can we revisit? One of the things I do, and this is a practice that I do often, is in my imagination, I sit down in a circle with my ancestors and we have dialogue about some of the things that we need to heal. Sometimes in my imagination, I sit down with freedom fighters. I have Thomas Sankara and Nelson Mandela and Winnie Mandela, and I sit down in my imagination and dialogue with them around processes and things that I can do. And lastly, sometimes I sit in my imagination with my great-grandmother, with women in my life that have shaped me in different ways. And in those conversations, we are in dialogue in my imagination. And what I begin to do is begin to hear those voices because those voices are part of me in different ways. And when I'm in those dialogues in my imagination and getting those perspectives and listening to those voices, things inside of me shift as well. And so they become part of my daily practice rather than things that were just in the past. I bring them as ancestors and as part of Ubuntu. When we talk about umoya, the soul, the ancestors, they are part of us. And so we can invite them to play a more purposeful, conscious role in our humanization process.
That's truly beautiful. And am I correct in summarizing in saying that socially just teaching and learning starts with the learning of ourselves, rehumanizing ourselves so that we can go out and rehumanize our society?
Humanize ourselves to humanize the world. Yes, the biggest way that I would offer is the question, who is talking, who is listening, who is making decisions, and why? Why is that the case? With those questions, we can begin to really understand our reality deeper.
Beautiful. And this is the part of the podcast, Warren, where we ask our guests, and we already know that you're doing a lot in the space of socially just learning and teaching to eradicate marginalization. But if we could have your closing thoughts on marginalization and how you intend to push the boundaries of social exclusion where you are.
Yes, the biggest way that I would offer is the question, who is talking, who is listening, who is making decisions, and why? Why is that the case? With those questions, we can begin to really understand our reality deeper.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Warren. And friends who are listening today, please be sure to check out Warren's social media links, which we will provide when we post this podcast. Follow the amazing work that he is doing. And let's keep the dialogue going, Warren. So that's all we have time for today. But thank you so much, Dr. Warren Leichtle-Chalken, for joining us for those amazing nuggets of wisdom, which we're going to take with us on this journey as we push the boundaries of social exclusion. Thanks, everybody, and goodbye.
This is Margins, pushing the boundaries of social exclusion.